Hello and welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping straight into a rather provocative premise today about how we approach education and child development. If you value structured learning and clear insights, you're absolutely in the right place. We're going to unpack a source text that challenges a massive, fundamental assumption in our society. The idea that traditional schooling and standard parenting interventions are the true engines of excellence. Well, the material we're looking at today argues the exact opposite. It's a fascinating perspective, so let's dive right in and see exactly what this text is claiming.
Every parent wants their child to excel. It's a universal assumption, right? And it's actually the starting point for the entire text we're analyzing today. The source acknowledges this deep-seated desire right out of the gate. Every parent wants the absolute best. We all want to see our kids reach their highest potential, even if achieving that potential usually means, losing a lot of sleep, a few gray hairs, and dealing with endless anxiety along the way. That underlying stress of parenting is basically a universal constant. But the text immediately pivots from this common ground to introduce a major conflict. It asks us to look at the typical, well-intentioned actions parents take, driven by this desire, and fundamentally questions them. Are those actions actually producing the intended result, or are we all just kind of spinning our wheels? The core conflict the author sets up revolves around a pretty stark contrast. On one side, we have what the source defines as syllabus alignment. And this is the default playbook for most of us, right? You admit your child into the best possible school you can afford, you pay for extra tutoring, you obsess over that B+ in math, wondering how to bump it up to an A, and you take immediate corrective action if those grades start to slip. Now, according to the text, these actions are certainly effective at doing one specific thing, aligning the child closer to a predetermined syllabus. It gets them to conform to a standard metric. But here's the absolutely crucial distinction the source makes. This does not bring out excellence. Conforming to a syllabus is just not the same thing as mastering a domain. True excellence, the text argues, is an entirely different beast. It demands a strictly one-on-one approach that the standard educational playbook completely ignores.
So, you might be wondering, why can't we just rely on our standard institutions to provide this one-on-one focus? Well, the source points out a functional reality of the educational system at large. Schools and colleges are literally designed to provide education to the masses. Think about the history of modern public education for a second. It was heavily influenced by the Industrial Revolution. It was designed to process a high volume of students efficiently, kind of like an assembly line, to create a standardized, capable workforce. Because of this sheer, massive scale, these institutions fundamentally lack the one-on-one system that the author claims is the absolute prerequisite for bringing out true excellence. And to be clear, it's not a malicious failure on the part of teachers or administrators, not at all. It is simply a structural limitation of a system built for volume rather than highly individualized, deep mentorship.
Now, you might immediately think, okay, what about school counselors? Aren't they the individualized support system built right into the school infrastructure? The source actually anticipates this exact counterargument. The text explicitly asserts that counselors, within the context of mass education, are simply not trained to bring out excellence. Their role is incredibly valuable, for sure. They're often focusing on vital behavioral support, crisis intervention, or standard academic and career advising to keep students moving smoothly through the pipeline. But according to our source material, they just don't possess the specialized, intensive training required to bridge that individualized gap. They aren't there to cultivate true standout excellence in a student's specific area of passion. They're there to keep the massive machine running smoothly for everyone.
So this brings us to a really crucial point. If the mass schooling model inherently can't do it, and standard counselors aren't trained to do it, how does excellence actually materialize? The text lays out exactly 3 avenues, and it claims these are the only 3 viable avenues that can successfully facilitate this necessary one-on-one approach. First, there are external guides, meaning dedicated private mentors. Second, the parents themselves step up and take on that intensive mentoring role. Or third, the child is just remarkably self-driven. The author frames excellence as something that requires active, individualized agency entirely outside the standard structure. Think about your own situation for a moment. Which of these 3 paths are you currently relying on for the children in your life? Are you actively filling that mentor role, paying an expert to do it, or simply hoping they figure it out entirely on their own?
Let's actually zoom in and explore that third path, the self-driven child, because the text breaks down its mechanics in a really fascinating way. It's a precise 3-step progression. First, the child gets an opportunity. Second, they dive incredibly deep into a specific area of interest. And third, they actively seize it. But what does that deep dive actually look like in practice, according to the source? Well, it's not just diligently doing homework. It's the kid who takes apart the family toaster to see how the circuits work, or the one who spends 6 hours on a Saturday voluntarily researching obscure historical battles. Now, the source is very realistic here. It explicitly notes that this entirely self-driven scenario is pretty rare. However, it emphasizes that this exact mechanism, opportunity, deep dive, seizing it, is the absolute foundation of what true success stories are all about, regardless of who is ultimately guiding the process.
Okay, but how long does this intensive process actually take? The text maps out a clear timeline that provides a very actionable takeaway regarding patience and observation. Because, as we know, cultivating excellence is fundamentally not an overnight process. The source explicitly states that the ultimate outcomes, those major, undeniable success stories, are only seen over the years. It takes a long time for a deep dive to genuinely turn into mastery. And let's be honest, parental patience is notoriously thin when we want the best for our kids right now. However, the author points out a crucial nuance here. While the ultimate goal takes years, slight, measurable changes can be witnessed much earlier, often in just months. This means that if the one-on-one approach is working, you're going to see early positive shifts in engagement, focus, or behavior long before you see that final polished result.
Having established the stark difference between just aligning to a syllabus and achieving true excellence, the source text suddenly shifts its tone. It moves away from explaining an educational theory to directly challenging the reader. What are you doing to bring out excellence in your child? It really forces us to confront our own actions. Are you just sending them to a good school, making sure they do their homework and checking their report cards? Because as we've learned from this text, that is merely syllabus alignment. The author demands to know what active, dedicated, one-on-one steps are being taken that actually go beyond the standard playbook. To answer that exact challenge, the source text introduces its own specific proprietary methodology. It asks the reader if they are engaging what it calls a Yansha certified guide or if they are training themselves to become a Yansha parent. Now, while the text doesn't provide a deep technical manual on these exact terms in the specific excerpt, it clearly frames them as the active, designed alternatives to passively relying on the mass schooling system. In the author's framework, these roles represent the specialized mentorship, whether that's outsourced to an expert or actively learned and applied by the parent, that fulfills that mandatory one-on-one requirement for excellence that we discussed earlier.
The text has built a very deliberate logical flow to reach its conclusion. Mass education only aligns a child to a syllabus. True excellence, on the other hand, strictly requires a one-on-one approach. Therefore, if you aren't actively securing that personalized mentorship, whether through external guides, extensive self-training, or just hoping for a rare, highly self-driven miracle, you have to face the final, lingering question posed by the source material. Are you leaving it to chance?